So we're recording now, and the purpose is for those people that either have booked to attend and are unable to make it, or those that wish to pick up this recording at a later date. And everybody who is attending this webinar will get a recording of this sent to them shortly after today. The other parts of the screen, just to make you aware, in addition to the chat area in the bottom right hand corner, you will see there's a small icon of a person with their hand held up in the top of the menu bar, and on that you can use that to set the status. So there's options in there that if you wish people to speak louder, softer, speed up, slow down, if you wish to laugh or applause, then if you click on one of those it will show next to your name in the attendees box. And don't forget just to clear the status afterwards as well, so that will put the icon away from after your name. So that's all of the household aspects covered. As we go through the webinar today, please do use that chat area. Any comments, any questions, if there's anything that you'd like to be gone over again, or a question that you've got for our expert today, then do use the chat area, and we'll make sure that we pause as we go through. I've mentioned with regard to your equipment settings and how you can adjust that speaker volume. We've got delighted to be joined today by Alistair McNaught. Alistair is a recognised authority on assistive technologies within the sector. Many of you will know Alistair and his work already, but we're delighted that he's been able to join us today. Alistair, if you'd just like to say hello.
Hello, and welcome to the session.
Brilliant, thank you, Alistair. Before I ask Alistair to start, my name's Rob Martin. I'm here on behalf of the Learning Futures project as well. Alice, thank you for that, saying a nice welcome to Alistair in the chat area. So this webinar is part of a three-stage process, and the idea is that you have some expert input through this webinar. We're going to share some resources with you as well, that we've done a bit of research online of what's available free of charge that we think will be useful for you. And we've also helped by putting some CPD activities together. So if you'd like to say, okay, this is stuff that I really want to get my teeth into, where can I start with my organisation? What can I do that's going to be helpful? We've put some activities together, and we'd recommend you have a look at those and pick into those the areas that you think are going to be most useful for you. All of that's available free of charge. The only thing that we would ask is, using the Learning Futures website, is that you share your experience. So if you use any of the materials, if there's something that you've specifically picked up from our expert today and that you found useful, what we'd ask you to do is go onto the Learning Futures site, and either through a blog or if you've created a resource that you've done something back in your organisation that you're happy to share, then share it through the useful resources section. But we'll show you how to do that at the end of the webinar. You may well be aware that this webinar is part of a series of webinars that we're running. Some of those have already happened, and we've got the recording that you're able to access at any time, but others we've got booked as well. So keep an eye open if there's any topics there in addition to the one that you've chosen today. So our agenda for today is, I'm going to ask Alistair to start his input in a second, and as I say, we'll pause as we go through so that you can have any questions answered, and also at the end of Alistair's input. And then I'll run you through the resources that are available online and the CPD activity. So without any further ado, I'm going to stop sharing these slides and just load another set of slides. That will just take a couple of seconds just to ping up on your screen. Wonderful, should just be loading now.
Is there on mine? Yep.
Wonderful. And so wonderful. So you should see some slides with the title of Assistive Technologies, Inclusive Practice, or both. So I'm going to hand over to Alistair, and I'm delighted that Alistair can join us today. So Alistair, over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, and thank you very much for taking the time to join us this afternoon. It's a very sunny afternoon down in Hampshire, where I am at the moment. I wanted to look at assistive technologies from a range of different viewpoints, because in some ways assistive technologies are kind of a little bit specialist, but in other ways you can use your everyday technologies and your everyday inclusive practice in an incredibly assistive way if you know the kind of ways to do it, and if you can be a little bit creative about things that already exist. So that's what we're going to look at, and I think probably a very good starting point is to say, why does it matter? and one of the key reasons assistive technologies matter is because we tend to have a monoculture of text in education, and that has a massive impact on the way learners can engage and sometimes their ability to engage, but it also has an impact in terms of entitlement, because we have this monoculture of text. We tend to give people text to read. We tend to assess people by means of them writing and us looking at text. But actually, under the terms of the Equality Act, every organisation has a duty to be able to provide information in accessible formats. And sometimes that monoculture of text isn't accessible. Let's have a look at the alternatives to the monoculture of text. So, if I was a blind student or a visually impaired student, and I asked you to consider the different media that might best suit my particular needs, I think you would probably find that audio would be pretty high on the list. Video may or may not be, because of course if a video's got a really clear narrative with it, maybe that could be really helpful. Things like interactivities may be quite tricky, especially if they're screen based. Text is kind of, well, it may be okay if you can get it read out to you. If you have it as a handout, it's probably not very helpful. And images are going to be your least favored. So from a visually impaired person, text is not going to be one of your key ways in which you want to engage. Now, for a dyslexic person, the pattern's slightly different, and if we did the same sort of plot here, for a dyslexic person, text is not going to be my favored way of engaging, and so consequently that's a very small line there. Interactivity, probably something that a lot of dyslexic learners, very practical, very kinesthetic. That can be a really good way of working. Video can be a great way of working. Audio can be great. Images. So dyslexic learners can respond really well to quite a wide range of media. Deaf learners, well, images work well. Interactivity works well. Video depends on how much is carried in the video stream compared to the audio stream. But text can provide quite a difficult environment for deaf learners. You wouldn't necessarily expect that, but one of the issues is that you're working in a second language, and it's a second language with completely different constructs and grammar and all the rest of it. So for prelingually deaf people who were born deaf or acquired deafness before they had learned to speak, text is actually not a really helpful way of working. People with learning difficulties, of course, interactivities, drag and drop things, sorting activities, etc. on screen or with physical things, that can work really well. Images, great. Audio, video, very useful. If we put them all together, this is what we find. So covering the wide range of, what you might call core disabilities, interactivity, audio, video, images have quite a strong representation, have a strong place. Text is very low. And of course, you can add also not just disabilities as a sort of sensory or cognitive disability, but there are people who have a disability or not a disability per se, but they have similar impacts. So if I'm if my first language is something other than English, then I may have some of the print impairment issues that somebody with dyslexia would have, for example. And that's in some organizations, that's a substantial number of your learners. So this is what sorry, just take a quick sip of water. This is what we establish then are good ways of working with and teaching with people with disabilities. Unfortunately, when we look at the typical diet in a typical classroom, it's kind of the inverse of that. Lots of text-based activities, maybe some images in the text, some images in books, etc. But that whole area of interactivity, video and audio is much, much more Spartan. Now, that in itself doesn't necessarily mean that we need an amazing investment in assistive technologies to get over those barriers. But what it may mean is that our mainstream technologies, using the virtual learning environment, having little interactivities, little interactive quizzes, using whatever tools you might choose to use, having video clips, having audio, involving learners in not just consuming those things, but also being part of creating them, that can be a really significant barrier, a really significant way of reducing the barrier to participation. So I'm going to stop for a minute now because I want you to pop something into the text chat pane. I would like to see to what extent that rings true in your organization. You represent quite a lot of FE colleges, and you represent, what else was it? So it's FE and work-based learning. So within your context, can you pop into the text chat pane whether that rings true, or whether, perhaps if you're work-based learning, you're working with motor mechanics, you do very little with text, so maybe that's not an issue for you. But let's just see what's coming from the key experts in this session, which are the people on the ground doing this every day. So Rob, as a work-based learning provider, you're still finding that's quite true. Okay, let's have a look at George and Alice and Sue. So I'm just waiting to see your comments come through. And of course, the starting point for this, the key thing that we're trying to look at just in this first few slides, is that assistive technology is not about necessarily new stuff. It's not about specialist stuff. It's not about stuff from catalogs. Assistive technology may simply be using mainstream technology and embracing it more effectively than is currently taking place. So carry on typing, those of you that are still busy typing in there. So there's quite a lot of agreement with that at the minute. Excellent. So Alice is talking about getting tutors to increase the use of the VLE. I have often argued that the virtual learning environment is an individual organization's biggest investment in assistive technology, because if you've got a really good, easy to use virtual learning environment that is used effectively and well, you can meet a huge range of needs of a very wide range of learners. Yeah, and it's that thing about kind of consistency. Sue's brought out that point there. People dabble sometimes with different things, but it's not consistently used. Now, there's no reason why we can't kind of encourage people to, to be moving beyond the dabble stage and to actually effectively engage in using the learners, not just to consume the content, but to create it too. There are some ways that can transform teaching that don't involve any investment in technology, because you can use the learners themselves and their tools. Okay, so keep any comments coming in. What I'm going to go on to is I'm now going to sort of step back a little bit and say, okay, that's my starting point, which is that all technology is potentially assistive technology if it's used effectively and well. But let's just step back for a minute and say, okay, let's not play any games or something. What do we mean by assistive technology? And I think very often in a learning support department, people would understand that we mean hardware, maybe adapted keyboards, adapted mice, a positioning aid so that, somebody can hold the keyboard at a particular angle that suits their wheelchair or the way that, maybe their body is curled. Then there's software, things like magnification, text-to-speech, word prediction, and so on. And then there are services. And by services, what I mean is something which is probably, in many cases, it's an online kind of service, or it's built into a phone, or it's built into something where you can give voice commands, you can send text away to RoboBraille and have it back 10 minutes later as an MP3 file. Optical character recognition, that's where you It's really coming on very nicely now with a number of free services where I can take a picture of a book in the library. I can open a book in the library. There's a page of dense text, and I'm thinking I'm not going to read that now. I can take a photograph of it with my mobile phone, and I can then take that photograph, pop it into um, Evernote or Google Drive or OneNote or a variety of tools, and it will automatically be able to search the text in there and even read it out to me, even though it was a picture rather than text. So those are the sorts of things I mean by services. Augmented reality, Alice is mentioning that augmented reality's got a fantastic role to play as well. I won't be going into that, or QR codes. That's another fun area to work in with tremendous potential for assistive technology. But yeah, that's exactly the sort of thing we're talking about. It's about trying to see beyond these labels and look at the services they provide. So let's just go back a slide. The one we looked at just now, hardware, software and service. I'm going to focus on software and services because hardware is kind of one-off stuff. You buy it, it lives with a particular desk or a particular learner. So there's not a lot you can say about hardware other than there's some great stuff there if you need it. But there's a lot of ways you can actually meet the needs, either the service needs or the other needs, through software. So I'm going to focus on software and services now. And what's interesting is when you begin to do that, you begin to realize actually Microsoft Word does a lot of these things. It does magnification, it does text to speech. You may have to actually add the speak button into the quick access toolbar, but it's there. It does word prediction in the sense of if you set up your autocorrect, so that when you type yours, it kind of comes up yours faithfully, yours sincerely, etc. Well, you can do that with all sorts of words. It does a kind of mind mapping. I think what I'd like to do now is stop sharing the slide and share my desktop, because then I can show you very quickly what this does. And then we'll move on to some of the others too. So if I share my screen, just pop in the text chat pane when you can see my screen. So in fact, we slightly lost as to what has appeared where. So perhaps if Rob could just tell me if people can see, because I've lost my screen now that I'm sharing it. Can people see?
Hi, so yeah, we can all see what we're seeing at the minute. Yeah, there's quite a few boxes open. You're now into Word with a document showing.
Excellent. Right, that's where I wanted to be. Okay, very quickly, some of the things I can do. Because I've used the heading styles, you see these lighting up along the top. I've used heading styles in this. I automatically, if I go to View, Navigation pane, I automatically have a collapsible menu system. I can navigate to any point in that document in seconds. Brilliant for every kind of learner, disabled or not disabled. But it's also actually, if I'm creating a document, it's a mind mapping tool, because I could say conditioning, does it go under products? No, it goes under hair services, so I'm going to move it down there. And then I can say hair services, is that part of does that come under products, or does products come under hair services? Well, I think maybe products comes under hair services, so I'll move it down there. And where's it gone? I lost it. Hair services has gone somewhere. Yeah, there it is. But what I'm going to do, I now want it demoted underneath that, so it sits under there. So effectively, it's like a linear mind map. I must remember not to save these changes. That would be embarrassing. I said I can change colors and things, can't I? So we can click on home. Design, I can change my page colors, what sort of page color works for me with my dyslexia or whatever. So just instant, we can change all that. If I change my view again, I might want to magnify it. But the problem is if I magnify it too much, I can end up going off the page, going off the edge of the page. So let's do this. Okay, so there's lots and lots of magnification, but that's not really helpful for me as a reader because I'm having to go backwards and forwards. But if I click on Web Layout View, then do the same again, zoom up, Because I put it to this new viewpoint, a web layout view, no matter how much I increase it, the sentence actually wraps very neatly around the space available. I also said that I can speak. So if I select a bit of text here, let's just zoom out a bit now. Okay, if I zoom out, I can select some text like that. I won't select a lot because I don't want to take too long. And then I've got a speak button that I've put up here. I can't take the time now to show you how to do that, but it's very easy. It's about 5 clicks and you can put speak selected text. It's present from Word 2010 onwards. Now you may be able to hear that coming out my laptop. You didn't, because I didn't put enough on there so that it's not speaking. But anyway, that's the process. So those are the sorts of things, some of the sorts of things that you can do very easily and instantly with Microsoft Word that so many learners aren't aware of. And you can do exactly the same with PDFs, which would be the next slide. So I'll just show you while the PDFs are here. Many of your learning materials, especially in work-based learning sometimes, where you've got things from sector skills councils, you've got health and safety stuff and so on, they'll look like this. Now that's kind of really hard to read, especially if you need to magnify it. So what can I do with that? Well, I can go view and then I can zoom and I can reflow the text so that instead of multiple columns, I've now only got just one column, and that's much easier for me to read. I may have to skip left and right now and again just to find where the column is, but that's just a really easy way of me finding that as a single page rather than multiple columns. And I can go to any magnification I like. That was in the middle of a table, so it didn't help. So let's just come out of that table. Let's go down to the page down here. I can magnify that because I'm on that reflow. It's wrapping round so that I can still see the full sentence. That's far better than buying magnification software. And if it's been done properly, which this one no, this one hasn't been, they can also include bookmarks to allow you to navigate your way through. Right, what I need to do now, Rob, is to come back to the slideshow. So I think, can I do that? Stop sharing. Yeah. Did I put the wrong one in there?
Hi, so it should just be loading now.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I think that's the wrong one. Hang on. Oh, let me just pop the right one in there. Hang on. It's that one there. There we go. Okay.
Right.
Oh, was that a car going past your office, Alistair?
Yes, that's right. It wasn't beating me, I don't think. So we've established then that we've got this huge range, and Rob's saying in there, really useful features, small changes. What a difference some of those changes can make to learners. So we picked out lots of things in assistive technologies, in PDFs and in Word. In your VLE, again, you've got similar things. Because it's browser-based, you can use magnification. Because it's browser-based, if you're using Chrome or Firefox, there are speaking plugins. So long as you've got a half-decent synthetic voice, like the free Tectis voices, for example, which are free for your entire organization and every staff member in it and every learner. I'll give you the URL. And you need to download these pretty soon because they won't be available after June. I think for voices. Yeah, there we go. Using a decent voice with some of those free text-to-speech tools, you can get really good quality text-to-speech. So all your web pages could talk just by using Chrome Speak in Chrome or using Firefox in the Firefox browser. You can change colors, you can do all the sorts of things that you might want to do. And there are some brilliant plugins as well for Chrome that will allow dyslexic learners to sort of strip out distracting stuff on the background, on all those videos down the side and so on. Change colors, all sorts. Okay, and of course, perhaps the ultimate for bring your own devices, the ultimate assistive technology is built into the learner's own phones or the tablets they may have access to, because most tablets will do magnification, text to speech. Many will do voice recognition. I've just updated Google on my phone, my Windows phone, and my work phone, which is an Android phone. If I say, OK, Google, photosynthesis, it will go and search Google for photosynthesis, which is great if you can't spell photosynthesis. So it's a way of really helping people. And then, of course, there's word prediction that may be built in, or you may have a separate app for that, mind mapping, color changing, and so on. So there are a range of really great ways in which the learner's own devices will allow them this range of services with this range of software. And finally, the last few slides, just be aware of the other kind of benefits that you can get, because there's a lot of free content out there that your learners are entitled to get access to, and that can allow you as a tutor to be able to either create really exciting content. So this tool, Xerti, is an accessible content creation tool, and you don't need technical skills in order to operate it. Once it's been loaded, it's a bit like Moodle. Once somebody's loaded it for you onto the system, you don't need technical skills to create materials. And that can produce some really nice examples. And there's a link there that you could go and have a look at some of the showcase examples there. So you can create interactive, accessible content. You can provide alternative content. If you go to VideoJug or look for blogs and podcasts and Vimeo and YouTube and things, there are ways you can provide completely alternative content to what your learners are already using. Now, you might say, hold on, yeah, I get the idea of the videos being a different way of working and more accessible. What about the text, though? If I'm sending them to websites, how does that get me away from text monoculture? Well, it does in the very simple way that if it's text on a website and I've got Google Chrome Speak plugin, then I can be listening to it. So it's not text. I've now turned text into audio. So there's loads of free and open stuff. And of course, many of those, in fact, the links I've got there are links to podcasts. So my learners could be learning from other experts without me having to do any more work. I can enrich my content with either with my own homegrown audio, using tools, free tools like Audacity, get the learners themselves creating spoken narratives instead of having to create a written narrative. Screen capture, get the learners creating a little video of how to do something rather than them having to write about how to do it. And then the last couple of things, either provide for them some specific assistive technology type tools that are free and would run without having to be installed, without needing admin rights. And here there's a whole range of tools like free text-to-speech tools. Turn anything on the VLE into an MP3 file you can listen to on your phone on the way back. Mind mapping, turn any mind map, use Xmind to turn a mind map into a Word document. Use word prediction to help you with your spelling. Use optical character recognition to take those pages you photocopied or pages you photographed in a book and turn them into text you can use. Just the key thing to end with, a couple of quick points here, is that when you begin to encourage staff to move in these new exciting ways, do try to avoid creating new barriers. So if you decide your members of staff go all into podcasts or all into images, have they now created barriers for your deaf students or your visually impaired students? Try to add value to everybody. By putting captions on an image, everybody benefits, because there's lots of people who look at an image and think, actually, I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to be seeing. What are the key points? Same with videos. You can't search for a keyword in a video. You may not have heard whether somebody said 1950, 50, or 1915, 15. If you've got a little transcript or a key point summary, they can find what they need there, and the same with the audio. So, last but not least, who is responsible? Well, actually, I can tell you absolutely assuredly it is not you. At least it is not you on your own. And the kind of people that are likely to be here today are the kind of people that probably feel that it is their responsibility. Well, it isn't. And that doesn't mean to say that you don't have a responsibility and an influence and a significant role to play, but what it means to say is that you can't do it on your own. And this idea of one person or one department being responsible for accessibility and assistive technologies wrong for the reasons we've looked at, because it's to do with tutors, it's to do with your VLE, it's to do with how empowered tutors are to use e-learning. So that's to do with staff development. It's to do with how empowered your learners are at recognizing what they can do with their own phones. It's to do with the procurement systems. Have you got a VLE that's completely inaccessible, or have you got library ebooks that are completely inaccessible because when they were being procured, nobody thought about accessibility? So it's about everybody. And if you wanted to kind of contact me or contact Jisc, because every one of you will have a Jisc account manager who could kind of advise on these things and probably put you in contact with me or one of my colleagues, then those are the contact details. So any questions? And sorry for any technical technical sort of dithering in the middle where I'm not quite as familiar with these systems as I should be.
Alistair, thank you. Thank you for that, Alistair. I'm just going to give people a chance to put any questions that they have. Whilst they're doing that, I'd just like to jump back to your diagram, if I can, of let's just go back. I think this is a really, really important point, and when I consider that I work for a work-based learning provider, and when I consider what we do, we went through a stage a number of years ago where learning styles was all the rage, and we would spend time at initial assessment looking at what was somebody's preferred learning style. And I think if only it dawned on us at the time that actually why were we asking it and what was the purpose of it, and what we needed to be asking, and the direction we ended up moving towards was much more based this sort of approach that you've really demonstrated in your diagram about what best way are we going to put this information, this learning across to learners, and what are their needs and how best can we meet those. And it was a fundamental point for us as an organisation, and as I say, we'd gone down this path of looking at learning styles, and if only with hindsight we'd look back and said, actually, why are we doing this, and isn't this a much more practical and useful way of doing something, it would have saved us an enormous amount of time.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the learning styles thing is really interesting because it came into a lot of flack, came under a lot of flack. There was some research that showed that actually learning styles didn't, in some cases, that they couldn't be seen to exist in a replicable way. In other bits of the research showed that it didn't make any difference, and then there were other areas of research showing that actually the people who progressed best were the people who could go from who had no preferred learning style, who could just adapt to whatever they had. Now, for me, there is absolutely no doubt that whatever you say about learning styles, learning preferences definitely exist. And there are people who definitely prefer to learn things by watching. There are others prefer to learn by listening, or prefer to. Now, those preferences may or may not have a gigantic impact on actual cognition. So it may be that if you prefer listening to things, but somebody makes you watch things, actually you can still end up learning just as well. But what they do have a big difference on is confidence. And if I'm somebody that actually really prefers to listen to things, and all I get is kind of shown text, read text, read text, read text, that undermines my confidence. And confidence is so tied up with learning, particularly with people who have disabilities, for whom there's often a kind of ongoing struggle against confidence.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. I can see that Sue's put a question there as well. If you ask you just have a look at that one.
Yes, no, that's a really interesting one, Sue. And what I'm doing, I'm just looking through. I've got a list for a completely different presentation I'm doing on Monday, and I just drop it into the text chat pane, and then I can talk through the individual bits, because essentially what I'm doing on Monday is looking at it's for digital leaders. Where do you start if you're going to move your organization forward in terms of digital leadership? So this is not supposed to be dense text there. It's actually on a PowerPoint slide. It's individual kind of things down in a sequence. But I think one of the first starting points is to recognize that teaching notes on the VLE is a learner entitlement, not a tutor preference. And so often it's kind of this sense that a tutor decides whether or not, if I'm IT kind of tutor, then I'll perhaps put my teaching notes on the VLE, and if I'm not, then I won't. Well, actually, because of the accessibility benefits that we've already established through the session of having text in digital format on the VLE Word document with some basic accessibility things like heading styles, that actually opens up all kinds of assistive technology benefits and accessibility benefits. So I would say that teaching notes on a VLE is a learner entitlement, and irrespective of what FELTAG suggest or don't suggest, I would say that all teaching notes, all PowerPoints, etc., should be on the VLE, and that would just be my policy. I would be a very dictatorial head, I can tell you. IT training, IT training is so often focused on IT, and that is entirely the wrong way about. Because if you focus IT training on how to do IT, then you kind of almost you lose the point about why you would want to in the first place. And I would say that IT training should focus on pedagogy, because IT training is about how you can or staff training should be about how you improve differentiation, how you can foster skills development, specific skills development, individual essay skills, creativity skills, collaboration skills, analysis skills, all these kind of Bloom's taxonomy things. It should be opportunities for creativity opportunities. So learners aren't responding to things that I'm doing. I don't create something and then they have to reflect on it, but actually I give them a task, a problem, and then they create it. Now, all those things, collaboration, self-assessment, all the rest of it, I would say if staff training focuses on how do you do any of those better, then actually IT has a really big answer for all of them. It's not the whole thing, and as a teacher I would still be teaching using bits of using music in some lessons, doing raps on the geological time scale, because sometimes that's just the way it works best. But IT gives you real ways in for all those things. And then going down that list, making sure that any training that you give training on how to do a video, well, also give training on how to either do a transcript alongside it, include that in the workflow, or training on how to take the key points of a video and make them available as a Word document you upload at the same time. And then productivity tools should be everywhere. Text-to-speech mind mapping, they're free. There's some brilliant free text-to-speech tools, brilliant free mind mapping tools. We named some of them. They should be everywhere because they're free. So why put them on a corner in the library where people with a disability label use them? Make everybody, well, not make everybody, but make them available as productivity tools for everyone. And then the people that really need them will use them unashamedly. And so on. And at the end of that list, bring your own device. Do encourage learners to use their own devices to do audio recordings, video recordings, etc. Be creative. And procurement. So many times I come across libraries who are spending lots of money on support needs of students who can't actually get onto the ebook system, or a disabled student can't use text to speech with the ebook system that the library's bought, And my question is, why did you buy a system without checking its accessibility? So making sure that accessibility is a fundamental part of all your procurement policies. Otherwise, you're just saying, we'll buy stuff, and if 10% of people can't use it, we'll pay the extra that we need to find another way. Sorry, that was a rant. I do get on I do get on my soapboxes sometimes.
Alistair, no, thank you. That's brilliant. I know Sue is typing in there. Just while Sue is finishing off, I'm just mindful of the time. If there are any other questions, then please do put them into the chat whilst we've got Alistair with us. But brilliant. I'm just looking at Sue's response. Thank you. Excellent. Thank you, Sue. Just on behalf of Learning Futures and for the audience here today, can I thank you, Alistair, for your input, because it's very rare that we come across somebody with both the experience and the passion for the work they're doing, and that clearly comes across, and you've given some really, really practical examples of things that people can do that, as you mentioned at the start, may not be a big investment or any investment. They may actually already have this stuff, but how you use it will make a tremendous difference. So on behalf of everybody here, thank you ever so much for your input. What I'd like to do now is move us on to the last two parts of this webinar. They're only very short parts, so I'm just going to stop Alistair's slides. Before I do, I should say, in true tradition to Alistair's word, he has provided the notes to go with the slides that we've got as well, and you should be able to see them on the screen. But I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment, and I'm just going to share my screen with you. And the purpose of doing this is just to take you to the other two parts of this webinar. So as I say, let's have a look. So ideally you're going to be seeing the Learning Futures site is going to come up on your screen in a second. Yep, wonderful. And I'm just going to jump us to the area. And if I scroll down to the assistive technology, there we go. If I click into the module, you'll see those three stages that I explained at the start of the webinar. So there's the expert input, and the recording from today's webinar will be available to people there. I'm just going to move us on to the resources. So we've done a bit of research online to say, okay, if you went online and looked for tools and resources that were, or if you wanted to do more about this, what would you do? So we've put together using Scoop.it. Some of you may be familiar with that. Just going to scroll down, and you'll see in there a range of different resources. And what we'd recommend you do, either yourself or on your own or with colleagues, or by all means point colleagues in this direction, is just to start to have a look at some of these examples. And we've chosen these specifically because we feel that they sort of punch above their, you get a good bang for your buck with these sorts of resources. So there's lots on there, lots that you may well be familiar with as well, but we would suggest that if you're going to go online, rather than trawling through everything, this would be a good starting point. And what we've done then is put together some activities that draw on the content of these resources. So to show you that, I'm just going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to bring you back into the CPD activity document with you. Okay, that should be loading on your screen in a couple of seconds. And the whole point of this is, as I say, just so that you're able to dip into this as and when you want to. I wouldn't recommend that you start at activity A and work your way down, but if I just scroll down, you'll see that if you're looking with yourself or as an organisation to say what's this all about, then there's a couple of videos that we'd point in the direction of, and we give you some suggestions of how you might use some of these resources. So effective solutions for different needs, some examples there, some of the Jisc Tech Disc toolbox, but also some examples there of looking at apps with iPads and how you might use them. Some of the projects that have been funded, and you may be aware that one of the projects through Learning Futures, Runshall College, is looking at assistive technologies, and we've got other projects looking at, some of them are using Xerti. There is a Xerti module on the CPD framework that we've got as well, and we've also got projects looking at things like QR codes, so it's worthwhile keeping an eye on those projects and the blogs that they're producing. But you can see in here we've put a little number in the corner of these activities as an indication of how much time that it might take you for some of these. So the research is there, by all means use that, dip into that as and when you feel that you'd like to know a little bit more, look at some other examples. And if you'd like some help of applying that back into your organisation, then by all means use these CPD activities. All we'd ask you to do is to share that on the Learning Futures site. So when you go onto the Learning Futures site, just as a blog when you join, or as a useful resource, anything that you create, if you've got a question or you say, I tried this but that didn't really work, then please feel free to share that with the community of practice. Okay. Just before we finish the webinar and close down, as I say, just to repeat, I'd like to thank Alistair for fantastic input, and I hope that you all found that useful. I can see the positive comments that you've put in the chat area, so thank you, Alistair, for the great work that you've done there. There are other CPD modules. If you found this one useful, please have a look at the others, either the recordings or the ones that are yet to come. But if there aren't any other questions, can I thank you on behalf of the Learning Futures programme for today. I hope it's been useful for you, and we look forward to seeing you again.